Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Monday, November 24th. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. If you've ever visited Yosemite National Park, did you ever stop and look at the animals that fill this part of the Sierra?
What my goal was in writing this book was what makes these animals uniquely Yosemite, or what is unique about them in the context of the Yosemite landscape.
One local author did, and she put together a whole book about it. We will have that conversation in just a moment.
Support for Central Valley Daily comes from Petunia's Place in Fresno, celebrating Small Business Saturday, November 29th, with a presentation and book signing with local author Jean Chaffee, story time with Eric Carl character Lowly Worm, book giveaways, and a gift certificate drawing. More information at petuniasbooks.com.
And now to our feature story. As farmers in the San Joaquin Valley are finishing harvesting their crops, the temperatures here and in the Sierra foothills and mountains are quickly cooling down. Fall in the Sierra is the perfect time to see the tree leaves turn and the seasons change. And it's the perfect time to get outdoors. I myself was there just days ago visiting Yosemite National Park. And while much of my time was spent marveling at the granite cliffs of El Capitan and Half Dome, I also took careful note of the many critters there, from birds to squirrels to frogs. And that's largely thanks to a conversation I recently had with Beth Pratt. We spoke about her new book titled Yosemite Wildlife: The Wonder of Animal Life in the Sierra Nevada. Beth is a longtime conservationist who has spent decades exploring and studying wildlife in Yosemite. And her new book features photos of the many creatures, big and small, that call the park home. And it's the first book in more than 100 years specifically dedicated to documenting Yosemite's wildlife. I start my conversation with Beth today by asking her what inspired this book in the first place.
You know, a lifelong love of wildlife since I was a little girl, and I grew up back east in Massachusetts. I loved wildlife. Frogs were my first animal growing up because we didn't have any big wildlife in Massachusetts. At the time, they'd all been banished from the neighborhoods. But I also loved national parks, and when I was a little girl, I would look at these picture books, and I still have them, of like national parks of the U.S. And I just remember thinking, someday, I'm gonna go work in these parks, and I did. I have moved to California after college and have been here ever since, and worked in Yosemite for a decade. I worked in Yellowstone National Park for 4 years, so I achieved that dream. But this book was literally born in 1992. I had just moved to California, and of course, one of the first things that I did was go to visit Yosemite. And I was really lucky. It was a day where they had a big storm, and there wasn't a lot of people in Yosemite Valley, which we all know how rare that is. And I had a four-wheel drive vehicle, and I had the valley almost to myself. And I saw this coyote. I had never seen a wild coyote because we just, at the time in Massachusetts, they had all been banished. And I'm in this incredibly beautiful place. I had never seen anything like it, El Capitan, Half Dome. And here's a marvelous wild animal who walks past me as I'm making a snowman. I have a picture of this coyote on my website. And I wanted to learn more about the park's wildlife and write about it as a writer. And that's where this book was born. I actually wrote in my journal that I wanted to do this. I made a homemade book. And then I set out now for over 30 years to be in the park and learn about the park wildlife over time. I knew I couldn't just write about wildlife on my park visit. So here we are 33 years later, if my math is correct. And, over 3 decades of observing the park wildlife, studying them, being out there. That's this book was born. That coyote's magical meeting of me, he inspired this book.
Yeah, an auspicious coyote. Now, you wrote the book and Rob Hirsch photographed the images, and there's just an astounding number of animals in the books and photographs of them. So how did this specific project come together?
Yeah, so for me, how it came together, there was that magical coyote moment. But then when started wanting to learn about the wildlife so I could write about them, I discovered Joseph Grinnell and Tracy Storr's landmark book and study that they did in the early 1900s. The book came out in 1924, and it's called Animal Life in the Yosemite. And they spent years out in the field, full time, observing the wildlife. And then I realized another book focused solely on Yosemite wildlife had not been written since then. I couldn't believe it. I kept Googling, when Google became a thing later on and as a project. So it also merged with that magical coyote moment. I wanted to continue their legacy. So I worked on it for, again, decades.
Wow.
And just as I got close, and a lot of that was field observation, being in the research library, studying some of the wildlife, like the higher elevation animals like pika and butterflies I love. But I started getting ready. I'm thinking, it's ready now. I have enough here. I feel like I had the expertise. And so I started shopping it around in about 2019, and there were a lot of publishers interested, or some. And for along most of the history of the book, I thought I would just use different photographers, right? Whoever had the best photo of the animal. But I met Rob Hirsch when he asked me to write an essay about the pika for his book, which was on Yosemite. And I just loved his work. So it was 2021. I'm just getting ready to accept some offers for this book. And I asked him, do you have enough to do all the photos or most of them? Because I love your work. You tell a story with your photos. And he agreed. And that's where Rob came on, and that he's bringing, decades himself of photographing the park's wildlife to the book. I think it really elevates the work. And then at the same time, Yosemite Conservancy said yes. And although others were interested, they were perfect. They wanted to invest in it. I mean, it's a 456-page book. And they aligned with my vision, which was pretty much go big or go home. If we're going to do this 100-year book, we're going to put photos. We're going to put archival material. We're not just going to make it a field guide. We're going to tell fully the story of these animals. So I can't thank the Yosemite Conservancy enough for investing in this 100-year book.
Yeah, just to describe it for listeners, as you said, it's over 400 pages. It's like a big coffee table book. The images are fantastic. And I was really struck by how many photos show the wildlife really blending into the background. They're sort of hidden like little treasures that you might not see if you weren't looking for them. And I'm especially thinking of the brown creeper bird, which was nestled in the bark. Yeah. And the Sierra tree frog is on like a mossy rock. So was that intentional to show even these small creatures that we might sometimes miss if we're on a hike or at the park?
Yeah, I think what you bring up is what I love about Rob's photography, and it was very much intentional. Again, this isn't a field guide. It's not an ID book. Rob's photos himself tell the story of the animals in the context of the landscape. And to me, that's the overall goal of this book as well, to inspire wonder, to inspire discovery, to detail the science. But there's been many books, say, written on the black bear or even frogs. So what we really tried to focus on, what my goal was in writing this book, was what makes these animals uniquely Yosemite, or what is unique about them in the context of the Yosemite landscape. And that's what I think, Rob's choices of photos to tell a story does well. These aren't just, a portrait or, a glamour shot of this wildlife. It shows them within the context of the landscape. And that's why he was the perfect photographer for this project.
Oh, absolutely. Many of the images, they made me smile, especially the pika, which is actually on the cover. But to your point, there's also a bobcat with prey in its mouth and little baby birds with their beaks open and a nest with their mom. So how did you decide which images to include in the book? Certainly there were probably more that didn't make it in.
This is where, when I brought Rob on, I'm like, listen, you choose the images. I'm not going to micromanage. The only time we had any sort of disagreement was when the photo did not match the text, right? In fact, you bring up that tree frog. He had one. I'm like, that's not matching the text, Rob. You got to change that out. But other than that, because he was the photographer, I wanted to respect that. So obviously, it was dictated by my species list and by my writing, right? So I gave him a list of all, and I spent years refining the species list. Wow. I spent years refining the sections that would be in there. So once I had that species list pretty much set, gave him the list, and really it was just his job to make sure he got as many photos of those species. But we really left the selection, or I did, up to him, and the designer, I think, worked with him.
I was surprised to see a bald eagle in your book, and you write that those sightings are pretty rare, but you've seen them over the years. So I'm curious, when you're out in the field for the book or just for pleasure, what's sort of your process when you're looking for wildlife? Is it happenstance, or do you go out searching? What's that like?
For me, it's a combination of everything. I think, even in my backyard here, and I live on 6 acres outside Yosemite. I have a lot of the wildlife in that book that's in my backyard, mountain lions, bears, you name it. But just stay open. For me, I'm less, especially now as I've gotten in my 50s, I'm less concerned on getting to the top of a peak or, making the ultimate destination. Is just being out there and being open to whatever I see. I actually am a volunteer researcher for the National Park Service. And in the summer, I do the same routes once or twice a week and just record everything I see. And, that in itself has led to some incredible discoveries. There are so that route I take a lot, but there are some animals I'm actively studying and not just, which is the pika, alpine butterflies, especially. I'm going and actually actively observing and looking with the purpose of, learning more about their behavior. But for me, and this is what I love, is open to anybody, these stories of this wildlife is unfolding daily. All you have to do is be there and be open and see what wonder is going to pop up. And I love that in my, over 30 years now of visiting this park, the experiences have been absolutely monumental. And those same experiences are open to anybody.
I love that. I also really liked this quote from the book that says, Half Dome should also be viewed as somebody's home. I'd love if you could explain what you mean by that.
That's my favorite line in the book, actually. I remember when I wrote it, it was like, that's what I love about writing. Where did that come from? That's perfect. But yeah, to me, that's it, is that, we look at a Yosemite and most people come and they look at, Half Dome as this geologic wonder. They come to the park and they take photos of this incredible scenery. But we should actually be looking at not just Half Dome, but the entire park. Is, we're visitors to these animals' home. The national parks are the greatest level of protection in all of our public lands for wildlife. And so I hope that, park visitors can also, as much as they're enjoying the scenery and some of the recreation they do, maybe stop and consider who really, this park is home to, and ensure that these animals stay protected by their behavior. I think for Yosemite especially, we tend to focus on the scenery. The wildlife is not as obvious sometimes. I worked in Yellowstone National Park for 4 years, and it's kind of the joke in the park world. You go to Yellowstone for the scenery, and Yellowstone for the wildlife, and you go to Yosemite for the scenery. And neither is correct. There's incredible scenery in Yellowstone, and there's incredible, obviously, wildlife in Yosemite. But in Yellowstone, the wildlife is everywhere. You got 1,000, elk that you see at one time, or 500 bison. So I think the reason Yosemite, most people aren't aware of the incredible wildlife there, is because you don't see a lot of it. You're not going to see wildlife on a scale that you do in a Yellowstone. But boy, is it there. And the biodiversity and the unique stories and animals are incredible.
Beth Pratt, author of Yosemite Wildlife, The Wonder of Animal Life in the Sierra Nevada. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
And that is today's show. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden and KVPR with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. You can find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
Sources and methods, the crown jewels of the intelligence community. Shorthand for how do we know what's real? Who told us? If you have those answers, you're on the inside, and NPR wants to bring you there. From the Pentagon to the State Department to spy agencies, listen to understand what's really happening and what it means for you. Sources and Methods, the new national security podcast from NPR.